Hey guys, I've shared a couple times on this account about God's sovereignty, about the fact that He is all powerful, and this extends, of course, over even our salvation. We don't have free will to accept Christ. It's not an open invitation that we can accept or reject. No, Christ has elected us before the world began. He has predestined His sheep to follow Him, and He puts His Spirit in us that our eyes might be unveiled to the weight and the power and the glory of the gospel. It's not something that comes from us. But whenever I share these things with people, inevitably it comes up. Well, if God is sovereign over all things, why would I be motivated, or why would I go out and evangelize? Why would I go into missions? Because if God is sovereign over all these things, those people are going to come to Christ. God can work through any means besides me to bring them to Christ. Well, this reasoning isn't the strongest. We have been commanded to share the gospel, to share this light that has been put in us, to tell others of His works. But this passage particularly that I was just reading in 1 Corinthians 3 and a couple before really, I think, hits the nail on the head, and it really addresses this matter and this, what do I want to say, objection or thought. Right, it just addresses it very well. So anyway, without any further ado, 1 Corinthians 3, Paul is rebuking the Corinthian church because they were kind of breaking up, and the church was breaking into factions of people who would say, well, I follow Paul, I follow Apollos, who was another preacher, or I follow Jesus Christ. And he's saying, no, you're all one. So with that context in mind, this is 1 Corinthians 3, verses 5 through 9. What then is Apollos? What is Paul? Servants through whom you believed, as the Lord assigned to each. So the Lord assigned who would come to Christ through the words of Paul and Apollos and every other preacher who has ever preached the gospel. Verse 6, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. He who plants and he who waters are one, and each will receive his wages according to his labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. So here we find out that we will be rewarded for faithfulness. When we are sharing the gospel, when we are faithful to be that light to others and to tell them the good news of Christ's coming, we are going to be rewarded for that. That is good. That is part of the good works that have been laid out before us. But God chooses to work through us for unbeknownst reasons, really, to us. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But God has chosen to work through these broken clay vessels that are us to bring about the salvation of His children on earth. And some more verses earlier in 1 Corinthians that talk about this is 1 Corinthians 1, verse 21. For since in the wisdom of God, so meaning God purposed this, the world did not know God through wisdom. It isn't something that we can learn. It's not, I've heard like wisdom akin to street smarts and knowledge like book smarts. It's not something that you can just, it's not street smarts, okay? Like it's something that the Lord purposes in us. So again, I'll just reread that part of the verse. For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. So it has pleased God to use our broken vessels, our misspoken words and thoughts and pauses and awkwardness. It has pleased Him to use us to bring about this salvation. And then also, let me see, I had another verse here picked out to read. Where was it? Oh, here we go. This is 1 Corinthians 1, verse 17. For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, and not with words of eloquent wisdom, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. If all preachers and everyone who ever shared the gospel shared it perfectly and eloquently and elegantly and without any flaws, we might think that it was speech that persuaded people into the kingdom, but no, it's not that at all. That's what this verse is saying. The cross of Christ is what holds the power. The gospel message itself, God's Spirit in us, unveiling our eyes, is what holds the power. So just remember today, I know it's easy for me to make excuses and be like, oh, I haven't studied apologetics enough to talk to this person. Or, oh, what if they ask questions and I don't know how to answer them? These aren't excuses, and they shouldn't be excuses that we use to not share. God is going to move, and he might move through you, but maybe you're going to plant the seed and you won't see the fruit. Maybe you're going to water that plant. Maybe you're going to come along someone in discipleship and get the opportunity to kind of increase their knowledge about God, but ultimately God gives the growth. This is not an excuse to step back and say, hey, God's going to do his thing. I don't need to be involved. No, he has chosen to work through you, and he will reward you for your faithfulness. So Christian, go out today, share the gospel. Do it, of course, thoughtfully, but it's not something that you're going to get perfectly right. And if it was, the cross might be emptied of its power. So just go into today knowing that the Lord wants to work through you, and be faithful to any callings that he calls you to share today. I love you all and hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.